The cold of the marble floor seeped through the thin fabric of my trousers, a familiar biting chill that promised hours of agony. My knees, already bruised and tender from a lifetime of imagined slights, screamed in protest against the unyielding stone. Before me, the row of ornately carved ancestral tablets of the Sterling family seemed to leer down, their polished surfaces reflecting the flickering light of the penitent candles like mocking demonic eyes. In the Sterling family, we do not tolerate a daughter-in-law without discipline, my mother-in-law, Eleanor Sterling, declared, her voice a sharp, precise weapon. She stood over me, a vision of cold elegance in her silk dress, her finger pointing like a judge passing a death sentence. You will kneel here until you admit your fault and learn your place. In my first life, those words had filled me with a terror so profound it turned my bones to water. I had begged, my voice a pathetic whimper echoing in the vast, silent hall. I had pleaded for forgiveness from my husband, from his simpering sister, from this harpy of a woman. That obedience had bought me nothing but a slow, excruciating end. This time the fear was gone. In its place was a cold, hard certainty, forged in the fires of my own spilled blood. I could still feel the ghost of it, the warm, sticky pool that had spread beneath me, drop by precious drop, until the world faded to black. I could still hear his voice, Alexander Sterling, my husband, just outside these very doors. Let her kneel, Isabella, he had said, his tone laced with bored impatience. She brought this on herself. It will be cleaner once she's gone. And then the voice of his beloved cousin Sophia, sweet as poisoned honey. Oh, Alex, once she's gone you'll finally be free. We can be together. His answer, a single devastating word that had severed the last thread of my will to live. Good. That word now echoed in my mind not as a wound but as a battle cry. My world had sunk into darkness then. Now as I opened my eyes I was back, gifted with a terrible and perfect vengeance. Eleanor was still spitting her venom. We must have accumulated 10 lifetimes of misfortune to have a wretched jinx like you tarnish our bloodline. Kneel. Alexander stood beside her, his handsome face a mask of irritation. Alara, just apologize to Mother. Stop causing a scene. At his side, Sophia clutched his arm, her wide, fake eyes glistening with manufactured tears. Alara, please don't be angry with Aunt Eleanor and Alex. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have given you the wrong idea. The same script. The same players. The same cold floor waiting to drink my life. My gaze drifted from their contemptuous faces to the altar. The ancestral tablets, the proud symbols of the Sterling lineage. And beside them the instrument of my discipline. A heavy, dark rosewood ruler, worn smooth by generations of use. In my past life I had looked upon it with dread. Now I saw it for what it was. A piece of wood as fragile as the family it represented. A strange calm settled over me. The pain in my knees was a distant echo. Eleanor was still talking, her curses washing over me like meaningless noise. I moved. Ignoring the shooting pain in my legs, I pushed myself to my feet. A collective gasp rippled through the room. I didn't look at them. My entire being was focused on that ruler. I strode to the altar, my shadow a giant defiant shape against the wall, and my fingers closed around the cool, dense wood. It felt solid and weighty in my hand, a promise of the destruction to come. Alara, what do you think you're doing? Alexander barked, taking a step forward. But he was too late. I turned, my eyes not on him but on the largest tablet in the center, the one belonging to the founding patriarch Alistair Sterling. With every ounce of strength I possessed, the strength of a woman who had already died once, I raised the ruler high above my head and brought it down with a scream that was ripped from the very depths of my soul. Frick. The sound was obscenely loud in the hallowed silence. The tablet split cleanly in two, the pieces crashing to the marble floor and shattering into 100 pathetic, lifeless fragments. Eleanor's tirade cut off in a strangled gurgle. Alexander's face went slack with shock. Sophia's hand flew to her mouth, but I didn't miss the gleam of triumph in her eyes. She thought I had just signed my own death warrant. I tossed the ruler onto the floor amidst the debris. It landed with a definitive dull thud. I looked at their stunned, twisted faces and a cold, mirthless laugh escaped my lips. Those worthless slabs of wood are not worthy of my knees. Alara, you've lost your mind. Alexander roared, finally shaking off his stupor. He lunged for me, his face a contorted mask of rage. I sidestepped him easily and he stumbled, crashing shoulder first into the cold stone wall with a grunt of pain. From the small bag I had been permitted to keep, I pulled out a folded stack of papers and flung them directly at his face. "Alexander Sterling," I said, my voice ringing with a clarity I hadn't possessed in years. "Divorce. From this moment on, you and I have nothing to do with one another." He snatched the papers from his face, his eyes scanning the top page. "Divorce agreement." His expression darkened, turning the color of storm clouds. "You foolish woman. Do you have any idea what you've done? Smashing our ancestral tablets and now this? I'll tell you now, you will never leave the Sterling family. I will keep you kneeling here until you rot." Eleanor found her voice again, trembling with apoplectic fury. "This is treason. Absolute treason. Alexander, tie her up. Lock her in the West Wing. No food, no water. Let her see how long her defiance lasts." I stood my ground, surrounded by their vile hatred, but I felt no fear. Only a cutting, glacial hatred. I had one more card to play before my exit. "A friendly piece of advice," I said, my tone conversational as if discussing the weather. "In 3 days, the North Star Residences project that your precious Omnicorp has invested in will be exposed. Massive fraud. Substandard, toxic building materials. Formaldehyde levels 100 times over the safety limit. The scandal will be on the front page of every paper. The stock will hit limit town for 3 consecutive days. If you have any sense, you'll liquidate your shares now." Silence. A dead, profound silence filled the ancestral hall, broken only by the ragged sound of Eleanor's breathing. Then Alexander laughed. It was a harsh, disbelieving sound. "You're insane. Truly certifiably insane. You think you can threaten me with the hysterical ravings of a jealous wife." He refused to sign the papers. Instead, he called for the family guards. "Take her to the blue room upstairs. Lock her in. We'll deal with her once she's come to her senses." They didn't believe me. That was fine. Reality, I knew, would be a far harsher teacher than I could ever be. As 2 large guards took my arms, I didn't struggle. I let them lead me away. Eleanor was shrieking orders behind me. "Take her phone. I don't want her contacting anyone. A few days in the dark will cure her of this madness." Their voices faded as I was marched up the grand staircase. The door to a lavishly appointed but sterile bedroom was opened. I was shoved inside, and I heard the heavy bolt slide into place with a final resonant thud. I was a prisoner once more. But this cage was of my own choosing. I walked to the window, looking down at the sprawling, manicured gardens of the Sterling estate. In my past life, this view had been my last glimpse of the world, a beautiful prison from which I never escaped. Now it was just a temporary holding cell. A slow, deliberate smile touched my lips. The game was afoot. I walked to the large 4-poster bed, lifted the heavy mattress, and felt along the seam I had carefully loosened months ago in a different life for a different reason. My fingers closed around the cool, sleek shape of a spare smartphone, its charger tucked neatly beside it. This was my secret, my lifeline, the escape route I had prepared for myself during the long, lonely nights of my first marriage. I powered it on, the glow of the screen illuminating my determined face in the dim room. I dialed a number I knew by heart. It was picked up on the second ring. "Ilara." It was my father, Robert Thorne. His voice was deep, steady, and filled with a quiet strength that had always been my anchor. "Dad," I said, my own voice calm and measured. "Don't ask me why. Just listen. Gather every single asset, every line of credit, every bit of capital the Thorne family can mobilize. In 3 days, I want you to short Omnicorp stock with me." There was a pause on the other end. My father was a man of logic and data, not impulse. But he also knew me. He knew I would not make such a request lightly. He understood that if I was speaking in this tone, something catastrophic had occurred. Finally, his answer came, a single solid word that held the weight of 1,000 promises. "Okay." That one word, that unwavering trust, was the foundation upon which I would build my revenge. In my past life, my weakness, my desperate hope for Alexander's love, had dragged my family down with me. The Thornes had been crushed under the Sterling heel, our company devoured, our lives left in ruins. My father had endured humiliation after humiliation, all in a futile attempt to protect me. In this life I would see the Thorne name rise to the top, its ascent paved with the shattered bones of the Sterling Empire. I looked out the window. The sky over the Sterling mansion was still clear, but I could feel the storm gathering on the horizon. I had lit the fuse. Now it was only a matter of time before the whole world exploded. The bolt on the door was a constant, heavy reminder of my captivity. For 2 days I was a ghost in the Sterling mansion. The only signs of life were the silent servants who slid trays of food through a small slot at the base of the door. Simple fare, bread, water, a thin soup designed to break my spirit, not nourish my body. But I ate every bite. I drank every drop. My body was a weapon now, and I would keep it sharp. Alexander and Eleanor were waiting for me to break. They expected tears, screams, desperate pounding on the door. They were relying on hunger, isolation, and fear to snap my spine as it had before. They didn't understand that the woman they had locked in here was no longer the Alara they knew. That Alara had died on this cold floor, and I was what remained, a vengeful spirit wearing her skin. With my hidden phone, I worked with a cold, methodical precision. I compiled a detailed dossier on the North Star Residences project. I listed the specific types of substandard materials: the cheap, carcinogenic waterproofing membranes, the formaldehyde-laced particle board, the faulty electrical wiring. I noted the supplier, a shady company called Quick Build Construct, which was owned by a cousin of Alexander's father, Charles Sterling. This was OmniCorp's fatal flaw, an empire built on nepotism and shoddy, dangerous cost-cutting. I organized every piece of evidence, every timeline I remembered from the scandal's explosion in my previous life, into a single damning document. I encrypted it with a password that was a bitter irony: Alexander's birthday. Then, using a public untraceable network I accessed by leeching a weak signal from a nearby cafe, I anonymously sent the file to a handful of financial journalists known for their tenacious, deep-dive investigations. I was a ghost in the machine, planting a bomb that would detonate right on schedule. Next, I opened another folder on my phone. Its name was a mockery: Our Happy Memories. Inside were the recordings I had secretly made over the last 2 years. Eleanor's vitriolic curses. "You're nothing but a stray dog we let into this house. Useless. Incompetent." Alexander's cold, dismissive remarks, his psychological abuse. And then the more concrete evidence. Hotel receipts, bank statements showing generous transfers to Sophia, screenshots of their intimate messages. I had once collected these as pathetic tokens of my pain, foolishly thinking they might one day make him see the truth. Now they were my arsenal. I encrypted this file too and sent it to my oldest friend, Marcus Lee, one of the city's most formidable lawyers. My message to him was brief and direct. "Marcus, they've locked me in. Illegal confinement. Life in danger. Call the police tomorrow at 10 a.m. The files explain everything. It's time." His reply was instantaneous. "Understood. Stay safe, Alara. The cavalry is coming." On the morning of the third day at 9 a.m. the market opened. I sat propped against the headboard, the phone in my hand displaying the candlestick chart for Omni Corporation. The opening was stable, even slightly green, ticking upward. I could imagine the smug satisfaction in the Sterling household. My prediction was being proven false. They would be toasting to my impending, humiliating capitulation. At 9:32 a.m., a news alert flashed across my screen. Breaking: OmniCorp's North Star Residences under investigation for massive fraud, toxic materials found. The article was thorough. It contained lab reports, sworn statements from anonymous whistleblowers, and even covert video from inside Quick Build Construct's warehouse. The evidence was irrefutable. I watched the chart in real time. The green line stuttered, plunged, and then went into a free fall. It was like watching a building collapse in fast motion. The numbers turned a bloody red. In under 10 minutes, it hit the lower limit. Billions of dollars in market value vaporized into thin air. A fierce, savage satisfaction coursed through me. This was the first taste. The first landmine had detonated. I could picture the chaos unfolding elsewhere in the mansion. Alexander would be besieged at OmniCorp's headquarters by frantic directors and furious shareholders. Eleanor would be in the grand parlor, stomping her feet and shrieking, blaming me, the jinx, for this catastrophe. They still had no idea that the architect of their ruin was the crazy woman they had locked away. Their imprisonment of me was my perfect alibi. Who would believe the hysterical, confined wife could orchestrate such a precise market attack? I wiped all traces of my activity from the phone, hid it back under the mattress and waited. I waited for Marcus. I waited for the police. I waited for the perfect moment to play my next card. The house was unnervingly quiet for a long time. Then around 2 p.m., I heard the distinct growl of Alexander's sports car pulling into the driveway below. He was home. And he was coming for me. It was time for my performance. I rushed to the door and began to pound on it with my fists, putting all the terror and despair of my first death into the act. Let me out. Please. Someone help me. I screamed, my voice raw and cracking. I dragged my fingernails down the wood, creating a horrible screeching sound. I wanted him to believe the pressure had finally shattered me. Alara. Shut up. His roar came from the other side of the door, furious and strained. Do you see what you've done? The company is being destroyed because of your vile curses. I let out a sob, delivering the lines I had rehearsed. No. I don't know anything. Alexander, I was wrong. I'll never dare again. I only love you too much. I was just so afraid Sophia would take you from me. That's why I said those horrible things. Please let me out. I'll do anything you say from now on. Anything. I spoke the most submissive words in the most broken, pitiful tone I could muster. I was giving him what he wanted. A broken wife ready to be molded. Outside he fell silent. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head. A compliant, mentally unstable wife was a useful tool. He could control the narrative. He could tell the world that all the accusations were the ravings of a sick woman, pushing all the blame onto me to save his company. His voice softened, adopting a coaxing, paternal tone. Alara, you need to calm down. If you sign a statement admitting you have emotional problems and that you slandered the company, I'll let you out. We can fix this. The fish had taken the bait. I kept up the act. I'll sign anything. I sobbed, making my voice weak and trembling. Just don't leave me. I'll do whatever you want, Alex. My head, it hurts so much. I think I'm bleeding. As I spoke, my right hand slipped beneath my pillow, closing around the object I had hidden there. A sharp, jagged shard of the ancestral tablet I had smashed. Its edge was as keen as a blade. Without a moment's hesitation, I drew it sharply across the soft flesh of my left forearm. A white-hot pain seared through me, so intense it stole my breath. I clenched my teeth, refusing to cry out. I watched, detached, as the skin split open and blood welled up, then poured forth in a hot crimson stream. The coppery scent filled my nostrils. I shoved my bleeding arm under the narrow gap at the bottom of the door, letting the blood drip onto the polished hallway floor outside. Alexander. Help me. I'm bleeding so much. My voice was a weak, desperate whisper, perfectly pitched to convey imminent collapse. Outside, I heard his sharp intake of breath. Alara. What the hell have you done now? His voice was angry, but I heard the panic beneath it. He was afraid. If I died in here, the scandal would be immense. He couldn't cover it up. His footsteps were frantic now, fumbling for the key. And right on cue, cutting through the tense silence of the mansion, came the sound I had been waiting for. The wail of sirens, growing louder, sharper, closer. Marcus had arrived with the police. The pool of blood seeping from under the door was no longer just a symptom of my desperation. It was my ticket to freedom and the second, more devastating gift I had prepared for Alexander Sterling. I had just turned a private family dispute into a very public criminal case. The sound of heavy, booted feet storming up the marble staircase was the sweetest music I had ever heard. The bolt on the door rattled. Alexander was there, key in hand, his face a pale mask of shock and confusion as he faced a squad of uniformed officers. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding," he began, his voice strained. "A simple marital." Marcus cut him off, his voice cold and authoritative. "Mr. Sterling, my client, Alara Thorne, has reported that you and your family have illegally confined her and inflicted grievous bodily harm. Step aside." The police pushed past him. The door was forced open. The scene that greeted them was everything I could have hoped for. Me collapsed in a growing pool of my own blood, my arm laid open, my face a deathly white. The gash was deep, vicious. "Help me," I whispered, and then let my eyes roll back, feigning a dead faint. Camera flashes exploded like lightning. The reporters Marcus had wisely tipped off captured every gruesome detail. The headline wrote itself: "Omni Corp heir accused of torturing wife, shocking abuse in upper-crust society. As I was carefully lifted onto a stretcher, I allowed my eyes to flutter open for a brief moment. I met Alexander's gaze across the room. For the first time I saw it in his eyes. Not just anger but genuine gut-wrenching fear. And beneath that, a dawning, bewildered horror. He was finally realizing that the game had changed and he was no longer the one holding all the cards. I gave him a small, cold, mocking smile before closing my eyes again. The detonation had only just begun. The world was a blur of sterile white and urgent, beeping sounds. I floated in a haze of medically induced calm, the sharp, clean scent of antiseptic a welcome replacement for the cloying perfume of decay that had haunted the Sterling mansion. My left arm was a numb, heavy log swathed in layers of bandage. A doctor's voice, calm and professional, explained the extent of the damage. Severed tendons, significant blood loss, a scar that would be permanent. I listened, nodding faintly as if it were happening to someone else. The pain was a small price for my freedom. The scar would be a trophy. My father was there within the hour. Robert Thorne stood at the foot of my bed, his broad shoulders seeming to carry the weight of my past suffering. He didn't speak, just looked at me, his eyes, so like my own, filled with a storm of grief and a ferocious, unwavering pride. He reached out and his large, calloused hand enveloped my uninjured one. No words were needed. The trust he had placed in me with that single okay on the phone was now backed by the visible proof of what I had endured. "Marcus is handling everything," he said finally, his voice a low rumble. "The police have taken Alexander and Eleanor in for questioning. Illegal confinement, grievous bodily harm. The evidence is compelling." I managed a weak smile. Good. The news cycle was a feeding frenzy. The initial story, "Heiress bleeds out in mansion prison," had been explosive enough. But Marcus, a master of legal theater, was just getting started. While I was being stitched up, he was in a conference room, preparing to hold the entire Sterling family accountable in the court of public opinion. He held an online press conference that afternoon. Millions tuned in. He was calm, precise, and devastating. He presented the divorce papers, outlining the systemic abuse. And then he played the audio. The speakers in the press room and on millions of devices across the city crackled to life with Eleanor Sterling's voice, stripped of its socialite polish, raw with venom. "You think you're something? You're a dog we let into this house. A useless, barren bitch. You can't even give my son a child. You're trash. Talk back to me again and I'll have you beaten. No one would even miss you." There were more clips. Hours of them condensed into a few soul-crushing minutes. Her curses, her threats, her constant, grinding belittlement. The room fell into a stunned silence, broken only by the relentless clicking of cameras. The audio went viral. It was a plague of truth, infecting every social media platform, every news outlet. Public opinion, which the Sterlings had always manipulated with their wealth and name, solidified into a wall of pure, unadulterated fury. The Sterling name became synonymous with cruelty and archaic brutality. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Eleanor Sterling, being questioned at the police station, saw the news playing on a monitor in the corner. She saw her own twisted face on the screen, heard her own vile words echoing back at her. Her face purpled. She tried to stand, to shriek a denial, but her body betrayed her. A strangled gasp was the only sound she made before she collapsed. "A stroke," the doctor said. Rushed to the same hospital as me, she was left partially paralyzed, her mouth twisted into a permanent sneer, her speech reduced to unintelligible grunts. The venomous mouth that had tormented me was now sealed shut by her own rage. It was a punishment so perfectly suited to her crimes it felt like divine justice. Meanwhile, the corporate dominoes continued to fall. Omnicorp's board of directors, already reeling from the North Star scandal and the stock's catastrophic plunge, could no longer stomach a CEO embroiled in a savage domestic abuse case. An emergency meeting was convened. Alexander Sterling was officially removed from his position. The news hit the wires just as he was being released on bail. His father, Charles Sterling, the patriarch I had rarely seen, was forced to emerge from the shadows. A tall, stern man who valued the company above all else, he was now overwhelmed. He had to face financial regulators, pacify shareholders screaming for blood, and manage the dual disasters caused by his son and his incapacitated wife. The pressure was immense, and for the first time the unflappable Charles Sterling looked old and brittle. And Sophia? My dear sweet Sophia. She began to panic. The tree she had been so desperately clinging to was not just falling. It was being chainsawed into splinters. She started quietly liquidating the gifts Alexander had given her, trying to put distance between herself and the sinking ship. She took to social media, posting a long, tearful essay painting herself as the ultimate victim, a naive young woman deceived by a powerful married man, unaware of the terrible abuse happening behind closed doors. She was the innocent white lotus, her purity tragically sullied. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to save herself. I had prepared a gift for her too. Marcus didn't even wait for her post to gain traction. Within an hour he released a new batch of evidence to the press. Bank statements showing massive, regular transfers from Alexander's private account to Sophia's. Hotel receipts from luxury resorts, dated concurrently with business trips I was told were men only. Intimate selfies she had sent him, which I had recovered from a cloud backup he'd foolishly thought was secure. The innocent white lotus was exposed as a calculated, greedy mistress, fully complicit and richly rewarded. The public turned on her with the same fury they'd directed at the Sterlings. Her reputation was atomized. The chaos within the Sterling family was now complete. When Charles was finally released after a grueling day of questioning, he didn't go to his wife's bedside. He went to find his son. I heard about it later from a nurse who couldn't resist gossiping. The shouting from Alexander's private waiting room echoed down the hall. You stupid, ungrateful bastard. You've ruined us. You've destroyed everything I built for a cheap, common whore. The sound of something smashing, a vase, a monitor, followed. It was said Charles had slapped Alexander across the face with enough force to leave a handprint, screaming that he had destroyed their legacy for a piece of trash. And in the room next door, Eleanor lay, trapped in her useless body, listening to the empire she had dedicated her life to crumble into dust. She could only make frantic horse-like noises, her eyes burning with a hatred so pure it must have been the only thing keeping her alive. Under the crushing weight of it all, Alexander finally saw Sophia for what she was. He called her, desperate for some shred of comfort, some alliance in the ruins. Her answer was as cold as the marble floor of the ancestral hall. Alexander, it's over. Don't contact me again. You're poison. His world, his pride, his future, all of it crumbled in that moment. The woman he had chosen over me, the woman for whom he had tacitly agreed to my death, had abandoned him the second his money and power were threatened. He couldn't accept it. He stormed out of the hospital and, in a scene of spectacular public degradation, found Sophia trying to sneak past a throng of reporters in the parking lot. The two of them, the golden couple of my nightmares, descended into a physical brawl. He grabbed her hair, yanking her head back, calling her an ungrateful slut. She shrieked, her carefully crafted persona gone, and clawed deep, bloody furrows down his cheek. He shoved her to the ground. She scrambled up and, in a final feral act, sank her teeth into his hand, tearing the skin. The cameras caught it all. It was the perfect, grotesque epilogue to their tawdry affair. I watched the footage on the small television in my hospital room, my father sitting silently beside me. There was no satisfaction in it, not the kind I had expected. It was just pitiful. The mighty laid lower than I could have ever imagined. My physical wounds were healing. But the final, most lethal stage of my revenge was still to come. It was time to move from the personal to the professional. It was time to file for divorce. And then it was time to drop the bomb that would erase the Sterlings from the face of the business world forever. The patent. The divorce petition was a formality, the official severing of a tie that death had already broken. I filed it from my hospital bed, citing adultery, cruelty, and irreconcilable differences. The media treated it as a foregone conclusion. But the real battle, the one that would determine the future, was fought not in family court, but in the cold, austere halls of the federal courthouse. This was the killing blow I had been saving, the one piece of information from my past life that was more valuable than all the abuse recordings and stock tips combined. In my first life, in a moment of drunken gloating after a major corporate victory, Alexander had let something slip. He'd bragged that OmniCorp's core technology, the high-efficiency Auraclear air purification module that was the foundation of their entire empire, wasn't theirs at all. Years ago his father Charles had stolen it. He'd taken the preliminary research and blueprints straight from the private laboratory of my father, Robert Thorne. My father, disheartened by an early failed prototype and lacking the ruthless ambition of a man like Charles Sterling, had shelved the project. He'd never published. He'd moved on to other work, the notes and data stored in dusty boxes, a forgotten dream. Charles, who had been a business associate at the time, had seen the potential. He'd taken it, patented it in OmniCorp's name, and built a billion-dollar industry on my family's stolen intellect. In this life, I told my father everything. The night after I was released from the hospital, we sat in his study, surrounded by his books and models. I laid out the entire sordid story. He listened, his face growing grimmer with each word. Then, without a word, he stood, walked to a locked cabinet in the corner, and pulled out several old leather-bound journals and a crate of faded schematics. "There," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "It's all there. Every calculation. Every failed experiment. Every breakthrough. I dated every page. It was irrefutable proof. The original manuscripts, the lab notes, the dated experimental data. It all predated OmniCorp's patent by several years. The Sterling's empire was built on a foundation of sand, and I was about to call in the tide. We sued. OmniCorp, Charles Sterling and Alexander Sterling, still a major shareholder, for patent infringement, theft of intellectual property and fraudulent enrichment. The lawsuit demanded $50 billion in damages and the immediate cessation of all use of the Oraclear technology. The courtroom was packed on the day of the preliminary hearing. Charles Sterling sat in the defendant's chair, a shell of the powerful man he had been. Overnight, his hair had turned a stark, shocking white. He looked shrunken, his expensive suit hanging loosely on his frame. Alexander sat beside his lawyer, his face a mask of stunned defeat. He kept shooting glances at me as if he still couldn't comprehend how I, the woman he had considered his property, had brought him to this precipice. Our legal team, led by Marcus, was methodical and devastating. They presented my father's original journals. They brought in expert witnesses who verified the age of the paper and ink. They laid out a timeline that was impossible to refute. The Sterling's lawyers spluttered and objected, but the truth was a battering ram, and it was smashing through their defenses. During a recess, Alexander cornered me in the hallway outside the courtroom. He looked haggard, his eyes bloodshot, the scratches from Sophia's nails still visible on his cheek. The scent of cheap whiskey clung to him, a far cry from the expensive cologne he usually wore. "Ilara," he begged, his voice a raw whisper. He reached for my hand, but I pulled it back as if from a hot stove. "I was wrong. I see that now. Let's not do this. Withdraw the lawsuit. We don't have to divorce. I'll make it up to you. I'll send Sophia away forever. I'll make my mother. Well, I'll make sure she can never hurt you again." I looked at him, my expression utterly flat. I felt nothing. No pity, no anger, not even contempt. "Alexander," I said, my voice calm and clear. "You're not begging because you love me or because you feel remorse. You're begging because your company is about to be annihilated. Your apologies are calculations. Your love is a ledger entry. And it's all worthless. I don't want it." I saw the last flicker of hope die in his eyes. He was finally, truly understanding. This wasn't a tantrum. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a reckoning. I brushed past him and walked back into the courtroom. He didn't follow. Days later, the judge issued the verdict. It was a total victory for the Thorne family. The divorce was granted. OmniCorp was found guilty of willful and malicious patent infringement. Charles Sterling was found personally liable. The judgment: $50 billion in damages and a permanent injunction against OmniCorp, forbidding them from using, manufacturing, or selling the Oraclear technology. It was a corporate death sentence. The judgment was so large it bankrupted the company instantly. Production lines were sealed. Assets were frozen. The OmniCorp Tower, once a symbol of Sterling power, was now a tombstone. The final time I saw Charles Sterling, he was still in the defendant's chair, unable to rise. He seemed to have aged 20 years in 2 hours. His clouded, defeated eyes were fixed on nothing. I walked over to him. From my bag I pulled out the rosewood ruler, the very one I had used to smash his family's tablets. I laid it gently on the table before him. "Chairman Sterling," I said, "do you recognize this?" His eyes, dull with shock, drifted down to the ruler. He frowned in confusion. This ruler, I continued, my voice steady and cold, was handcrafted by my grandfather, a master woodworker. He only ever made 3. He gave this one to my father, Robert Thorne. 35 years ago my father kept it along with his early research notebooks in a locked safe in his lab. Then the lab was burglarized. The notebooks vanished. And so did you. I leaned forward slightly. My father thought the ruler was lost forever. He never imagined it would become the Sterling family's sacred instrument of discipline. I let the silence hang between us, thick and heavy. You used a tool stolen from my family to beat the daughter of the man you robbed. Tell me, Charles, do you find that as ironic as I do? His head jerked up. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. It was a destruction more complete than any financial loss. I had not just taken his company, I had annihilated the very narrative of his legacy. The family law he had revered, the symbol of his authority, belonged to the family he had betrayed. The empire he was so proud of was built on a theft. He collapsed forward, his forehead hitting the polished wood of the table with a soft thud. He didn't move again. I had delivered the fatal strike. The war was over. The silence in the wake of the legal tsunami was deafening. The Sterling Empire, a monolith that had dominated the city's skyline and its social hierarchy for decades, was gone. Its collapse was not a slow erosion but a catastrophic implosion, so swift and total it left a vacuum that the city itself seemed to gasp into. The bankruptcy proceedings were a public dissection. Omnicorp's carcass was picked over by creditors, lawyers and vulture funds. The Sterling mansion, that gilded cage of my suffering, was seized by the banks, its contents auctioned off to pay the monumental debts. I watched the listings online with a detached curiosity. The gaudy chandelier under which Eleanor had cursed me, the dining table where I had endured countless silent, contemptuous meals, the bed where I had cried myself to sleep, all of it sold to the highest bidder. It felt like watching a cancer being surgically removed from the world. Retribution, cold and precise, came for each of them. Eleanor Sterling remained in a long-term care facility, a prisoner in her own broken body. The nurses who had seen the news offered no sympathy. She was just another difficult patient, one who grunted and moaned and soiled herself, her eyes forever burning with a helpless, venomous rage. The woman who had valued appearance and control above all else was now condemned to a life of utter dependence and indignity. It was the perfect hellish prison for her. Charles Sterling, stripped of his wealth, his company and his dignity, was sentenced to 8 years in prison for fraud and theft on an industrial scale. The photo of him being led away in handcuffs, his white hair disheveled, his head bowed, was the final nail in the Sterling coffin. The patriarch was in a literal cage, a fate he had once believed was only for lesser men. Sophia tried to flee, but the world is small for those with a notorious face. I sued her for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The court, swayed by the mountain of evidence Marcus presented, found her guilty. She wasn't sent to jail, but the judgment bankrupted her. Her sentence was 500 hours of community service. The paparazzi loved to photograph her in a bright orange vest, picking up trash on the highway or scrubbing graffiti off public walls. The White Lotus was now a public janitor, her beauty fading under the harsh sun and the weight of universal scorn. She vanished eventually, but not into a life of luxury. She disappeared into the anonymous, grinding struggle of poverty. And then there was Alexander. He had lost everything. His name was mud. His fortune was gone. His family was shattered. The world he had ruled was now a hostile wasteland. He was unemployable in any position that required a modicum of trust. I heard snippets, passed along like morbid curiosities. He was seen working as a day laborer on the docks, his once elegant hands now calloused and grimy, his shoulders stooped under the weight of sacks he'd never have to carry in his old life. A grainy photo of him emerged in the business section of a newspaper, a cautionary tale about hubris, tucked beside the stock listings he could no longer afford to play. The most poignant report came from a former colleague of my father's who volunteered at the hospital. He saw Alexander in the corridor of the long-term care wing. Every day, like clockwork, he would arrive to feed his mother. Eleanor, trapped in her rage, would refuse the food, spitting it out, letting it dribble down her chin and onto her gown. Alexander would stand there, his expression utterly numb, and patiently wipe her face, her clothes, and try again. There was no love in the act, no tenderness. It was a bleak, endless penance, a life sentence of his own. He was tending to the living corpse of the woman whose greed and cruelty had set him on this path, and in doing so he was burying himself alive. They had become tragic jokes, footnotes in the city's gossip, their suffering a public spectacle. I felt no joy in it. The vengeance I had craved in the cold darkness of the ancestral hall had been achieved, and its taste was ashen. It was a necessary surgery, the removal of a malignant force from my life, but the scar remained both on my arm and on my soul. My focus turned from destruction to creation. With the colossal compensation from the patent lawsuit, a sum so vast it felt abstract, my father and I founded a new company. We named it Ethelgard Technologies. An old word for noble and guard for protection. A noble protection. It was our vow to protect what was ours, to build something with integrity that could never be stolen. My father, Robert, finally returned to his first love. As Chief Technology Officer, he set up a state-of-the-art lab, filled with the hum of potential and the smell of fresh solder. The light was back in his eyes, the creative spark that Charles Sterling had tried to extinguish. He worked on refining his original Auroclear technology, making it more efficient, more accessible. This time it would bear the Thorn name with pride. I became the chairwoman. The boardroom, once a territory of patronizing men like Charles and Alexander, was now my domain. We acquired the best of OmniCorp's remaining assets, their manufacturing plants, after a complete ethical overhaul, their most talented engineers and designers. These were the people who had once looked through me, the silent wife at the charity galas. Now they sat across from me in meetings, their posture tense, their voices respectful, their eyes filled with a new wary awe. I was not a forgiving leader, but I was a fair one. Competence was rewarded. Sycophancy was not. I was building a different kind of empire. I took Alexander's old office at the top of the OmniCorp tower. I had it completely gutted and remodeled. Out went the dark, heavy wood and the ostentatious gold. In came a minimalist landscape of steel, glass, and pale gray marble. The walls were glass, offering a panoramic, commanding view of the city. It was a cold, sharp, beautiful space. It matched the person I had become. My desk was sparse. A computer, a few files, and on a simple black stand the rosewood ruler. I had it professionally restored. The craftsman had polished away every stain, every scar, every memory of the violence it had inflicted and received. Now it was smooth and cool, its wood grain a complex, beautiful map under the light. It was no longer a tool of punishment. It was a trophy. A warning. A memorial. It was the silent heart of my new empire, a constant reminder of the cost of victory and the price of weakness. Late at night, when the city lights glittered like a field of fallen stars, I would sit in the deep silence of the office. The only sound was the low hum of the climate control and the occasional dull ache in my left arm when the weather turned damp. The ugly, centipede-like scar would throb, a phantom pain from a life I had left behind. It and the ruler together defined the meaning of my rebirth. One was a testament to what I had endured, the other to what I had overcome. I rarely thought of the Sterlings anymore. They were ghosts, and I had stopped living in their haunted house. My life was filled with blueprints and business forecasts, with strategy meetings and product launches. Ethelgard was thriving, a phoenix risen from the ashes of OmniCorp's greed. We didn't just take their space, we built on their ruins. I moved Ethelgard's headquarters to a new soaring tower we constructed in the North District. The land we built on was the abandoned, cursed site of the North Star Residences, the very project that had been the first crack in the Sterling Foundation. Where they had planned to build a monument to their corruption, we built a beacon of our integrity. The irony was not lost on anyone. From my new top-floor office, I looked down on the city that had once pitied me. Now they respected me. They feared me a little too. And that was just fine. The past was a closed ledger. But one afternoon, driven by an impulse I didn't fully understand, I left the office early. I drove out of the city, the skyscrapers shrinking in my rearview mirror, until I reached the rolling, unnamed hills on the outskirts. I parked and walked, following a path only I knew, until I came to a secluded, sunny spot overlooking a quiet valley. There was no tombstone here. No marker. But I knew. This was where the other Alara was buried. Not the one who had bled out on the cold marble, but the one who had died long before. the hopeful gentle girl who had believed in love and happy endings. I had buried her here in my heart the day I was reborn. I stood quietly for a long time. The wind whispered through the long grass, carrying the clean, honest scent of earth and wildflowers. For a single fleeting moment I thought I felt a presence, a sigh of release on the breeze. A final farewell from the woman I might have been. Or perhaps it was just the wind. I turned and walked back down the mountain, never looking back. The sunset stretched my shadow out before me, long and dark, a silhouette of power and resolve stretching toward the future I had carved out with my own 2 hands. The ghost was finally at peace. And the queen had returned to her kingdom. A few months later I received a letter. It was from a state penitentiary. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. With a deep breath I opened it. Lara. They tell me I'm dying. Some aggressive cancer. The doctors say it's the accumulated price of a hard life. I suppose it is. I heard what you did for that small company. The one we were going to gut. My father would have called you a fool. A sentimental woman. It's what he always called you. I've had a long time to think in here. To think about the empire he built on theft and the one you're building on something else. I despised you for destroying my family. But I see now you only destroyed the rot that was already there. You were the fire that cleared the field. I don't ask for your forgiveness. I have no right to it. I write this only to say that I see you now. Not as the villain of my story but as the architect of your own. And it is a more formidable thing than my father ever dreamed of. There is no one else left to write to. Charles Sterling. I held the letter for a long time, the paper feeling fragile and ancient in my hands. There was no apology, no grand redemption. Just a stark final acknowledgement from the man who had been the source of so much of my pain. It was the final thread snipped. The last ghost laid to rest. He saw me. And in seeing me he ceased to have any power over me. I never wrote back. There was nothing left to say. That weekend I drove back to the unnamed hill. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet. The grassy mound was still unmarked, but wildflowers had begun to bloom around it. I didn't stand there as a mourner or a victor this time. I stood there as myself. The wind whispered through the grass and this time I heard no sigh, felt no presence other than my own. The girl buried here was finally, truly at peace because I was. I had integrated her gentleness with my strength, her hope with my resolve. I was no longer a vengeful ghost or a fortress under siege. I was a whole woman. I looked down at the city, at the Ethelgard Tower glowing in the distance. It was no longer just a symbol of my victory over the Sterlings. It was a symbol of what I had built in spite of them. It was my creation. I turned and walked down the mountain, the last of the sunset at my back. My shadow stretched out before me, not as a specter of the past, but as a path into the future. The battles were over. The war was won. The rest of my life was not about defending my kingdom but about living in it. I was a Lara Thorne and my story was finally, completely my own. The end.